So far we've created a couple classes and added some simple stubbed implementations of our methods. In this lesson we'll talk about how we can call those methods. I've made some minor updates to the Objective-C project, so I'd recommend grabbing the latest version from your working files directory. We invoke a method on an Objective-C object by passing it a message. As I mentioned in an earlier video, Objective-C uses dynamic binding to bind a message to a particular object and method. This happens transparently by the Objective-C runtime. The details of how this happens are not particularly important. And you can really use the phrases passing a message and invoking a method interchangeably, but I want you to be aware of the term messaging as it relates to calling methods. The syntax for passing messages or invoking methods often looks odd to Objective-C newcomers. We do so by wrapping the object and message pair in brackets. Let's demonstrate this by creating a new instance of our artist class and passing it some messages. I'll switch over to my main app.m file. And before we can work with the artist class in this file, we need to first import its header. So we'll say import artist. This will import the artist class and make its class and symbols known to the main app. The artist class inherits from NSObject. An NSObject defines two key methods related to object creation. It defines a class method called alloc. And alloc is used to allocate the appropriate amount of memory for a class. And then an instance method called init, and this is used to initialize that memory. So we can use these two methods when we're creating an instance of artist. I'll define a local variable called artist. And on the artist class, I'm going to call its alloc method. And this will allocate the appropriate amount of memory for this class. Now, in addition to allocating the memory, I also need to initialize that. This is a separate method, and I could define it on a separate line, but it's always best to call this init method immediately after calling alloc. And you can nest these messages together. So we actually have two messages here. There's alloc, this inner message, and then init, this outer message. And by nesting these two together, we can ensure that by the time this line completes, we have a valid object instance in our hands. Now that I have an artist, I can call its methods. So if I wanted to call it setName method, create the Beatles. So this is passing the setName message with the string the Beatles as its argument type. The Foundation framework defines this handy function called nslog. And nslog is used to log messages out to the console. So if I want to log this object to the console, I can use nslog. And it takes a format string. So one or more format specifiers will be used. In this case, I'm going to just define this %@ symbol, which says I want to log an Objective-C object to the console. I can pass my artist. And let me run this application. And I'll shrink the debug area so we can see just the console. And there we go. We can see we created an instance of artist and logged it to the console. It's not a particularly useful log message, however. It would be better if we could see the actual name instead of this hash code that's showing in the console. So we can do that by invoking a method. So let's call artist, and let's invoke its name method. So this should spit out the valid name. Let's run this again. Well, that doesn't quite look right. Instead of seeing the Beatles, we just see null. Let's take a look at our artist implementation. Our name method is simply returning nil, and our setName is never actually writing that value. So let's fix that problem. We need a location for the artist to store this name. We can define an instance variable inside this pair of braces. So specifically, we'll define an NSString called name. So give it the name _name. And in our name method, we'll return whatever value it currently is storing. And in the setName, I'm going to say name equals name. Now, admittedly, the implementation of the setName method, I'm kind of cheating. This will work for what we're doing right now. But when we talk about memory management, I'll explain what the problem is with this and also describe what the correct solution would be. Let's switch back to our main app and run this again. And there we go. Artist, the Beatles. That looks much better. Now, artist also defines this order album quantity method. So how would we invoke that? Well, let's switch back. And that order album method takes an album and a quantity. So we'd want to create an instance of an album. So let's say import album, so we can make the album class known. And we'll actually create two instances of album. And we'll call this one rubber sole, alloc init. And we'll create album, the white album. At this point, we've created the instances of the class, but we need to go back and actually set their names. So rubber sole, set name, sole, and white album. All right, so we've created two album instances. We can now take our artist and call its order album. So we'll order an instance of rubber sole and specify a quantity of 1. So you can see how this method that takes multiple method arguments is called. And we'll call order album on the white album. And this album is so good, we better order 2 copies. So when I call order album, the implementation I've added just simply writes a log message to the console. So let me run this again. And there we go. We ordered 1 copy of rubber sole and ordered 2 copies of the white album. So you should now have a basic understanding of Objective-C's messaging syntax. If this is the first time you've seen the syntax, it undoubtedly looks odd. But after you've done it for a while, it still looks odd, but surprisingly becomes second nature after a while. We'll be writing a lot of code during this course, so I'm confident you'll be quite comfortable with this syntax by the end.